Hello, everyone, once again, and welcome to the Bible Beyond the Basics podcast. We are your hosts, Reverend Bob Andrews and Jason Clapper. We thank you so much for joining us.
You're
once
a
again.
reverend too.
I am a reverend too.
You're far more reverend than I am. You know that.
I've always never been comfortable using the term reverend, verbally. I don't know what it. I've been fine writing it on paper, but for whatever reason.
Well, it's an honorific. It's like the Honorable Governor Wolf.
Yeah.
We are the Reverend Pastors. It's an honorific that is actually supposed to be only written, never spoken, but colloquially. My first church I was called Revy.
Bob, have you ever done a DNA test?
They may have done one on me without me knowing it, but I've never done one.
You've never done one and gotten the results back, but you know much about your ancestry or background?
Oh, I know a lot. I know my sister got hers. I can go back to Lucretia Borgia.
Yeah,
I'm related to her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I got one recently. There was some interesting stuff. I've got a lot of Russian in my background, some Scottish, which is interesting. And the Scottish, actually, I was able to trace back on one of the websites, finding birth and death certificates. Over in, there was an older Presbyterian church over in Selinsgrove, where it seemed like one of my first ancestors to come into the country was a member of the Presbyterian church over that way in the 1800s. So it was interesting to find that. Also, you find some of the more current stuff, your cousins and things like that. And I found some second cousins and such. I wonder if anybody could date their ancestry back to Jesus's family lineage. Bob, what do you think?
Well, didn't the Da Vinci Code do that?
Isn't that what it's all about?
Oh, yeah. DNA is fun because it's actually when my sister took it, what puzzled her, because hers has got to be like mine. 95% the British Isles. One came from England. Everybody else was a little bit farther north. Okay, so but she was surprised by the Scandinavian, and I said, okay, Ev, my sister Evelyn, the Vikings. They came and pillaged and raped.
It's just like, half the world or something as a relative of Genghis Khan.
But I imagine, given our science today, if you believe what I believe, and perhaps yourself, I don't quite know where you stand on Jesus's lineage. If he had lots of brothers and sisters, then we could track his DNA down.
Yeah, wouldn't that be an interesting thing to find? Coming from James or whoever it might be.
Well, James.
Well, wasn't there a James? Wasn't there?
Okay, the text. Actually, the question isn't really about Jesus; it's about Mary.
Yeah.
But basically, here Matthew 53, and when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his own country, he taught them in the synagogue. And they were so astonished because he was a contractor with his dad, and they're kind of figuring out, where did he get all this good inside information? Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us?
Of course, they don't get named, but not important to record that part. But
so how do we account for this text? As Protestants, we got no problem with it.
Yeah, not super challenging for us.
Yeah, but no, it's those are his brothers and his sisters. There's a couple of other veiled references. I am particularly also impressed with all Jesus' family's references and stories, especially when he talks about fatherhood.
Yeah.
He must have loved Joseph because I wonder how much of his understanding of God was informed more by Joseph in relating what a father can be.
That's a really interesting point because you get, one of the things we talk about with Jesus is he referred to God as Abba, Father, and a more intimate version of Father, even almost like a daddy kind of a language, and something that rabbis didn't really do. And we talk about sometimes how sometimes our relationships with our parents can affect the way that we view God, and you can only assume that some of that must have been happening with Jesus. What did his relationship with his father look like?
It's we go to these stories about how we grew up. I grew up in a big family. I got two brothers, two older brothers, and two younger sisters, and I was in the middle, and so we had lots of fun with me being completely neglected, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It might lead to some of my rebelliousness and independence, but
you heard it here first. Bob encourages neglect.
But that influence, because I've talked to a few women who had very bad relationships with their fathers, and that harmed their understanding of God. In my own case, I don't think I ever threw a football or kicked a soccer ball or threw a baseball with my father. That just wasn't our relationship. Now, I did shovel rosin with him, and I worked in the plant manufacturing paint, and Dad would pick us up or take us, feed us pancakes at 5:30 in the morning on Saturdays, and the three of us would go down and spend the day working with Dad. That was our background.
Yeah.
So that kind of intimacy was through work.
And for me, it's always been a strange sort of language, because I didn't grow up with a father. I never even knew my father, and I still don't know who he is to this day. And so for me, the concept of father was just always this sort of out there, ethereal vapor kind of a concept. I don't have much connected to it.
Yeah. And I think Jesus had a really good relationship with Joseph. The working together, that's one thing that, again, Dad was not a fun dad. We had some good times on trips, cooking out, that sort of thing. We were a handshake. I don't think I ever hugged my dad. If my father had ever said to me he loved me, later on he came to do that when he got a lot more. Basically, warning: after 62, every guy starts learning to weep and they cry at commercials and things like that. It's just you get a little bubbly.
Yeah, sure.
But it was that Dad's sense of affection was he would chase me around the lawn to slip me $20 before I went home or went back to school. But working with, and so it is an important influence, and I really think Jesus' relationship with Joseph gave him a better understanding of his relationship with the Father in heaven. It's a healthy thing. Not everybody gets it, has that privilege. But it also, you learn a lot when you grow up in a family. And with two older brothers and sharing the same room, heck, we shared the same dresser and the same underwear. And having sisters, you learn a whole different dynamic. My best friend from college grew up as a single child. And he kept on talking about the way he would get up to go to the bathroom and his mother would make his bed when he would return. It was just, he was indulged a whole lot. And it showed, John. In college when we had parties, he was the entertainer, I did the cooking.
Sounds about right, yeah.
But you learn a whole lot, and I really, we don't have a problem with this understanding of James and Joseph. In fact, James is very likely the same James who wrote the letter of James, who becomes the leader of Jerusalem.
One of the things I find interesting, I've done book studies on the book of James a couple of times in the last few years. There's some, it's very Jewish, and we sometimes talk about how it's different from Paul's, and it's very different from Paul's writings, but it's very Jewish in nature. It feels very parabolic. But I get more echoes of Jesus's teaching in the book of James than I think in anywhere else in the New Testament epistles. It feels like Paul is always talking about, theologically, what was Jesus saying? What does Jesus mean? But so seldom does Paul actually get into, well, what was Jesus actually saying? But it feels like in James, it feels like he's actually wrestling with what Jesus was trying to teach more so than some of the other epistles. And to me, it's always, I get this sense like this is someone who had this relationship with him and listened to him so many times, and that was what he was trying to deal with.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense again if you understand that dad was a blue collar worker. Okay, and it was a normal family life, and this is the way my scenario plays out. Because the larger family life also includes James and John over in the Sea of Galilee, because I believe their mom, Salome, was Mary's sister. So I think a lot of the whole relationships of the early days of Jesus' ministry were family. John the Baptist was his second cousin, 6 months older than him. So everybody was connected. And I really think Jesus grew up with James and John, visiting them. But that whole idea of being a blue-collar worker is a contract. We talk about the carpenter, but you've got to remember also there weren't a lot of trees. So they were probably also stonemasons. There was a very rich city next to them.
There's a good argument that I've read that that term carpenter actually meant stonemason.
Yeah, okay. Which makes sense because the rich city nearby, which was a Greek city, which was hiring because it was rebuilding at the time following an earthquake, it would have been good employment for the blue-collar workers. Basically, that town was Danville. The other town is Shamokin that Jesus grew up in.
Yeah.
Basically, drawing the employees and working there. And James and Judas, they would have all been in the family business. They're boys. They're going to become men. They're learning the trade, how to place tile, how to work, which I got. Okay, I'm going to do a story. It's one of my favorite stories. We've got to watch the time.
Well, you're going to tell a story, Bob.
But we were in Honduras, and one of my best buddies, Dave Franklin, was in charge of vascular surgery, and he went down, and he really didn't want anybody to know that he was a doctor.
Okay.
Because if we're in a little outback village and everybody discovers he's a doctor, there are going to be 200 children and women. And David is not a doctor; he was a surgeon. and so we're around a well, and David is down in the well, and we're taking turns lining it with stones. And David is doing a good job because he's a surgeon. He's going to be immaculate and perfect. And around are the Hondurans and myself and our guide, and we're talking and kind of kibitzing, and all of a sudden David hears the word doctor. One of the local Honduran men said, "I heard he's a doctor." And I was able to go back and say, no, señor. Mi amigo es un cirujano. And he basically takes a knife and cuts your neck. And they go, okay. But the best part of the story was that David was in the hole. And then after that, I said, well, you have to understand, David is a surgeon, yes. He cut your neck. He does precise surgery. But you really have to know that his father laid tile in Georgia. And then they were impressed. The Hondurans were more impressed that he was a son of a tile man. Which, because in their world, that makes sense. Just this way, I come from a factory background. I'm far more impressed with people who do an honest day work.
Yeah. I've done many jobs. The hardest job I've ever had is working in a factory.
Yeah.
I for a couple of months one summer, I flipped veneer. David R. Webb in Williamsport, and I was just a seasonal worker. But by the time I was done, I was almost at seniority. Yeah. People would come in for a day and quit. You basically just bend over, stand up, flip wood all day long. Oh, yeah. It's a hard job.
Well, we couldn't work because we were sons. We were slave labor. Yeah. We got paid in Stewart's root beer.
Oh, yeah. There you go. I've been paid in lemonade before for certain jobs, so yeah.
So my scenario that I would propose and present, and by the way, I'm about to completely get every Roman Catholic angry at me. Basically, they're in the family business. Jesus is not going to go off into his ministry until he knows he can leave. He's responsible. My supposition is that Joseph dies. Now that he knows his younger brothers can take over the business and do what they need to do, that's when he goes out. Because we know they stayed back in Nazareth. And they're going to stay in the same business. That's just what you do.
Yeah.
And so Jesus kind of takes off. Which, if I were the younger brothers, I'd kind of say, Jesus, that's not what you should be doing.
Yeah. It makes sense, just, one of the commandments, respect your mother and father. And, he's not going to leave Mary to herself to not be taken care of. So, yeah.
Well, and which goes back, and glad you mentioned Mary, because this whole question doesn't have to do with brothers and sisters. It has to do with Mary. Because what happened to Mary was that they took away from her a natural, loving, happy life. And they made her a perpetual virgin. We have to understand a lot of this doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from the shall we say, the false gospels. For example, the Gospel of James. And Mary's story and how she was immaculately conceived. Jesus was not immaculately conceived. He was a virgin birth, different from immaculately conceived by her parents. And then Mary remains this perpetual virgin, which in the Hebrew culture, virginity is a curse. If you are a perpetual virgin, that means you're not married and having children, which is the whole reason and the epitome of a woman's life and the greatest joy of a Jewish woman's life. And so what happened was that they actually conflated the worship of the Virgin Mary with worship of the Greek gods and Artemis, especially in Ephesus and that sort of thing. They turned Mary into this goddess, almost a co-equal to the god.
Sure.
That's why she is called, according to Roman Catholic tradition and other tradition, Theotokos, which is the mother of God. We're saying, no, she's not the mother of God. She is the mother of Jesus. And so it's how we want to understand Mary that this has to do with. And the whole Mary thing was a much later inducement to recruit believers from the pagan world. I want to think that Mary lived a wonderful, normal life with her sons and daughters and had a good time with Joseph. And that Jesus was raised in that kind of a healthy family unit. The reason we have some inclination that that's a better scenario is that in this, when it talks about, is this not his brothers and sisters, is that the word used is adelphos, basically, which means brothers and sisters, just changing whether it's feminine or masculine, which means they are sharers of the Delphos. Which is the
You might know it from Philadelphia, city of brotherly love.
Well, no, that particular word, not Adelphia, Adelphus.
Okay.
I'm sorry, very close.
It sounds like they have the same root.
They have they say, which would make sense if you understand. Delphus means the womb.
Okay.
They have the same uterus, the same origin.
Okay.
So they're saying they are sharers of the womb. Which is going to be tough to do if you're a perpetual virgin. I don't want to take away from Jesus his humanity and turn him into this idol. I find Jesus much more approachable and understandable, and indeed all his testimony, if you had a mom and dad and loved them, and had brothers and sisters and got beat up by them and beat them up. What you do. But you learn to live together and work together. And you love as a family can only love, which is sometimes really weird.
Yeah. Well, sounds good, Bob.
Well, we have fun.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.